Thank you. We now turn to an actual practicing doctor who also can give us some insights in terms of the impact. Thank you, Dr. Cassidy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Vanderwater, can we pull up my first slide, please? Do we have it? So let me just make the point that it is, if you take part-time workers in the aggregate across all quintiles of our population, you might not see an increase in the number of part-time workers. But what that slide shows, and I'm sorry it is so small, is that if you break it down into the quintiles, the lowest quintile is the one which gets hammered. And those are the ones whose recovery from part-time work to full-time work has not occurred during this recession. Now, I believe this is from Heritage Foundation, which is a conservative think tank, but I also noticed that Janet Yellen, in her testimony at the Board of Governors meeting in Chicago of last year, said that there's 7 million people working part-time who would like a full-time job. This number much larger than we would expect at 6.7 unemployment based on past experience. This partly employed worker is a sign that labor conditions are worse. Now, again, if you take the aggregate, it obscures it. But if you break it down, it is those most vulnerable workers who are being punished by this law. Now, when you do your research, do you break it down into, you mentioned the aggregate data, you specifically use the word aggregate. Have you looked specifically at the lowest quintile of income workers?
Well, again, I have to admit, Mr. Cassidy, that I'm not familiar with this particular chart, but what I am familiar with, for example, there's been a focus, you look at the restaurant industry as an example, which is an industry which hires primarily people lower down in the earnings distribution. The work week has returned essentially to pre-recession levels.
Now, they always have a lot of part-time workers. Excuse me, I only have 5 minutes. I don't mean to interrupt.
Go ahead, sir.
They always have a lot of part-time workers. There is an article, a woman, Naomi Ballman, I think, from Chicago, that looked at textile workers and service industry. In fact, can we go to our next slide? Maybe I should just go to this. In this one, it's a tale of two recoveries. That slide on your right speaks, the red line is lower income workers and the blue line is higher income. Those are the number of hours, the percent change since December 2007. You can see, again, a divergence where the lower income worker continues to have lower part-time jobs, lower work weeks, and the higher wage worker. Now, isn't that what economic theory would predict? That the marginal cost of providing insurance for a low-wage worker is higher, and so therefore she or he is more likely to have their hours reduced so the employer avoids the penalty?
No, actually not. And I think actually this goes back to what I would have said partly in response to Mr. Brady's point. I think if there's one thing that economists generally agree on, and is that health care, like other fringe benefits, represents a form of compensation to the worker, so that requiring employers to offer health coverage is for the most part, and again there are some exceptions, but for the most part not likely to affect total compensation, but simply to affect the mix.
But if you're at minimum wage,
please may I?
But I only have 2 minutes. If you're already at minimum wage, then that will be a significant raise for the person who would be a minimum wage worker, correct?
That would be the exception, but most workers are not at the minimum.
And those would be the lowest quintile workers. Those would be the ones we found would be most vulnerable to having their hours reduced. I'm down to again,
I'm not when you say lowest quintile, I'm not sure what measure you're using to define the quintiles, but surely they're probably part of it.
Hourly wage. And so then let me just make a couple more points. We're almost out of time. You mentioned that the insurance premium increases have mitigated. I will point out there's an article from Politico, I don't know if we have that handout, is that? Okay, Sesto. Now let me point out that when people speak about health care cost, this is health care cost in the white line, which actually began to decrease prior to Obamacare. This is the inflation rate in percentages of insurance premiums cost. And I will point out that the latest headlines are that insurers are asking for as much as a 60% increase in premiums. This is in the individual exchange market. So if we actually want to look at the effect of the Obamacare law, there's a disconnect now between the compounding rate increases of the premiums and healthcare cost. By the way, that is a secular trend in which it began to decrease prior to the onset of the law. This is what Dr. Sergio is experiencing. His workers are finding this is their reality, not this is their reality. Lastly, I'm out of time. I'll make one more point. Actually, I'm out of time. I'll hold my point. Thank you.